Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I haven't done this for a while, so you know that thing where you go do yoga and run around the block to get your heart pumped and do all that.
I've
I
heard
haven't,
about it.
I haven't done any of that.
Oh,
So I basically just rolled out of bed. There's a Santa Ana wind. You know what that is in LA?
does it
Uh,
involve blowing, air moving?
it involves the hot wind from the desert comes in, and it carries all the crap from the desert, and it makes you crazy. It's called crazy weather. Joan Didion wrote whole books about it. Anyway, so I'm suffering from the Santa Ana wind.
So far this is sounding auspicious.
Yeah, we got to, but we're going to overcome all odds.
Well, we must because it's a momentous occasion. By the time this airs in 3 days, it will have been 10 years since the first Hi Mickey, Hi Bob.
Really? How time flies.
No one told you this?
It seems like I've done nothing for 10 years, but
Oh, don't sell yourself short. I think you've several missteps characterize your career, and we'll get to that. You haven't been idle.
I look forward to it.
We will be doing actually a critique of each other's career moves over the last 10 years.
Right, this is going to be a friendship in Blogging Heads because we're going to critique each other's 10 years, and then I think we're going to recommend what each other should do for the next 10 years.
We will do that. And we'll do other things we think, but I forget what they are.
It could be brutally honest.
Well, it will be. That's what we're known for.
Stay tuned.
That's why America came to love and or ignore us, depending on the demographic.
And also, we'll have the new single from Adele up later. No, sorry,
No, that's your night job.
I'm channeling public radio.
What is your job these days? You're jobless, right? I mean, not quite. I don't mean that in a bad way.
Well, let's.
Okay, should we put that?
Let's start in with the thorough psychological inventory.
Okay.
Yes, I quit the Daily Caller because they wouldn't let me publish an attack on Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And given that I have some savings and I wanted to plunge into the whatever immigration fights were happening at the time.
Oh, do you have an interest in the issue of immigration? I didn't know that.
It's waning, but yes. And I also wanted to convert my blog to Twitter-based because I find Twitter very satisfying. So if you go to my blog now, kausfiles.com, you'll see it's mainly tweets, and that's it's sort of I find that I think they have more impact than blog items these days. So Daily Caller wouldn't do that, so I just started that on my site. I found a very good tech guy who could do it for me, and
has that taken off? Is that like
no? But it's a solid 2,000 hits a day, which is more than I expected, given that they can get basically everything that's on the blog on Twitter. So why go to the blog? It must be because they like me, Mickey Kaus. Or there's an occasional blog item. Maybe they're going for that, and there's some commentary on the site. But so it's okay. I'm not making any money on it. I'm not trying to monetize on it. Monetize it. And you know, given that, I'm doing better than 99% of the web publications out there. So I'm not unhappy that I'm not losing any money. I'm living off savings for a while, and that will end soon, and I'll have to find productive employment. I do find that people pay more attention to you when you're actually employed as opposed to a freelance.
In the media business, I've found that affiliation with what we used to call a publication is an asset. Although, you know, as you're showing us, not quite to the extent that it used to be. It's not quite such a prerequisite.
No, Twitter isn't that sensitive. There are all sorts of freelancers on Twitter who are quite powerful. But I noticed in terms of more respectable sites linking to you, people want to know what the mainstream media is saying, you know, whatever it is.
Right.
You know, so they don't want to know what freelance bloggers are saying.
Right.
Who knew?
Who did know, Mickey? And who knew 10 years ago, when we started this, that it would mushroom into the gargantuan conglomerate that it is?
Sorry, I'm laughing on camera. I shouldn't do that.
Laughing with me or at me, Mickey?
It's hard to tell. But
hey,
How big is Blogging Heads?
It's like the screen. See, the screen is this big, and my hands. All I can say is that my hands are beyond the screen. You can't see my hands when I hold out my hands to signify the size of Blogging Heads. So I don't know how to convey it within the constraints of this medium to how big Blogging Heads is.
Well, let's get into this, Bob, because since you started Blogging Heads, and it was
we started Blogging Heads, Mickey, along with Greg Dingle, by the way, who's now richer than both of us put together by a long shot as a Facebook employee who has stock options, but I digress.
Well, he should be, but you and Greg Dingle figured out how to make it work, and so you did most of the work. I came along to hog the credit, which was...
You did do that, yes.
Which is I found a sound life philosophy. But
your promotional instincts guided the early years of failure.
But here's the thing, Bob. Since you did this, there's been a whole podcast revolution.
Yeah.
Podcasts are like the only thing that's making money. They're podcasts that have millions of subscribers. You had a podcast, okay, with some video, but it could be a podcast. Why didn't you just make it a podcast, and then you would be a millionaire too, like these other guys who are doing podcasts from their kitchen table?
I take it we're already in the career critique phase.
We were plunging into it.
First of all, we are actually a podcast. I mean, in the sense that now, and this was not true in the early years, the number of audio podcast downloads exceeds the number of video streams. So it is now mainly a podcast. However, the video part is vitally important, we believe. So there has been a little of that evolution. I think the question you're asking is, why aren't there several additional zeros at the end of the number of podcast downloads?
No, I think it's just a marketing thing. When I see, click on this video, I don't want to click on the video. For some reason,
Right.
I see videos that's time-consuming and cumbersome. It might not work. Even if it works, it's a very inefficient way of conveying communication. It's basically, unless it's entertainment like a TV show and I've allotted it that time, I don't want to click on it. For some reason, people don't feel that way about podcasts. I don't know why. It's because they're trapped in their cars, I guess. So
it's a totally different thing. People listen to podcasts while taking walks, while jogging, and so on. I've been saying for some time that I thought our future lay in podcasts, and it's true. We're mainly a podcast.
But you just spread your arms out to show how big Blogging Heads was. You're not going to get that on a podcast. You're looking for a visual effect there. I'm joking, but
I'm not saying I've totally adapted to the new our new hybrid media identity.
For some reason, if you sold it without the video, I think it might take off in a way that
I kind of think I beg to differ. I think when you have guests on, like you've been on podcasts, right? I mean, people say, you want to be in my podcast? And maybe you've heard of the podcast, maybe you haven't. You go on the podcast, you get basically no feedback, and you don't know, like, was that worth the time? People come on Blogging Heads, and they go, oh, there's an image of me, and they look down, and there are comments. There are clearly people who actually saw you. Not only that, but I would venture to say we have some of the more insightful and intermittently, at least, civil commenters in the commenter universe. And by the way, among the people we're thanking on our 10th anniversary is those very commenters, along with all other viewers and listeners. Proceed.
You make a persuasive case, and that's exactly the experience I've had on a couple of podcasts that I've been on. And I don't listen to podcasts myself. All I'm saying is,
I do listen to podcasts.
Okay, go ahead.
There's a slightly larger scale version of what I'm talking about, which is Twit, the Week in Tech. They started shortly before we started as a split-screen video thing, but they were tech people. They were actually doing it by some Skype-like thing, which we weren't, but we won't get into that. We had a more convoluted approach. But it remains to this day that very thing where a lot of podcast downloads and a video dimension as well. It just works on a much larger scale for them, partly because they're doing stuff about tech products, which has a large audience, and because they're very entrepreneurial and so on. But it's a good thing. Leo Laporte.
Okay, well, that's my critique. You could have been a millionaire.
No, it's interesting. It definitely could have become something bigger some of the things it could have become that would be bigger are things I would not have wanted to be part of. Like you might have turned it into just a platform, a neutral platform where you make it easy for people to get together and whoever wants to use it, like YouTube. But I didn't have any interest in that because then you're not exerting any actual influence. If it's not curated, if you're not,
Then some neocons might take it over and foment war in the Middle East.
Neocons continue to appear on our site to this day. Such is our tolerance for the various viewpoints that make America the great country it is. David Frum was on within the last couple of months. Then again, so was Glenn Greenwald, and there you go. Okay.
If Frum's your idea of a neocon, you're barely dipping your toe in the waters.
Are you kidding? Why? Who's...
Well, he seems quite sensible now on Syria, for example. He had a quite sensible approach. And
what did he say?
I forget, but it wasn't gung ho. We got to put troops on the ground. I don't think it was. There were 14 Twitter points. I forget what they were.
Syria is such a mess.
I think the basic thing is that the migrant problem and basically the migrant problem makes it our problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be our problem. I think that was his line.
I think it would be our problem anyway. But we digress. We did not come here to talk about Syria.
It's all about immigration, Bob.
Yeah. By the way, the last time he was on, I believe he was actually on Meaning of Life TV, which is our new sister site launched this year. So the conglomerate continues to expand in all known directions. So there are now two sites. There's meaningoflife.tv, there's bloggingheads.tv.
So that means we can't talk about the meaning of life here?
Yeah, we can talk about it here. We'll link to it from Meaning of Life TV. How is the meaning of your life? Seriously. Let's go deep. Let's go deep, Mickey. Look into your soul. Do you have a soul? That's one question we would address on Meaning of Life TV. Does the soul exist? Does your soul exist?
I haven't gone that deep. What does it have to do with immigration?
Okay, let's just go that deep then.
No.
What's the deal with your immigration obsession, Mickey?
What are you driving at?
These are related. I think the question of the state of your soul and the question of your fascination with immigration may not be entirely unrelated.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's do a little career critique on your side.
Yeah, we're at the friendship ending part of the dialogue. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm still feeling kind of warmly toward you, but I don't expect that to last for more than 7 or 8 more minutes as we continue to go back and forth in this fascinating career critique, which I'm sure is of interest to literally scores of Americans if you include Hawaii and Alaska.
Go ahead.
So, what's the deal with the immigration obsession?
Well, it's weird. I was interviewed by a publication yesterday. They wanted to do a profile of me, and I employed the time-tested technique of being so boring that they lost all interest in doing the profile, I think. But basically, starting from first principles or second principles, it seems, I wrote a book saying that what liberals want is social equality, not income equality, and basically it's what
liberals want income equality. You were saying what they should focus on is social equality.
I'm saying if they looked into their souls and asked why they want income equality, it would be because
they would say, what I really want is for people of all income levels to be using the same same public park, and treating each other with respect. And
respect is the key. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's all about respect. What makes people happy is respect. I think there's a sound Darwinian basis for that. Mm-hmm. And in the modern world, respect has to be equal respect. We're not going to have the respect of a feudal society where people have great respect for their servants for playing their role ably in the grand scheme of things. We're a democracy. We demand equal respect. How do you get equal respect?
By showering disrespect on immigrants?
No, I was arguing that well, if we shouldn't worry about incomes at the top. If we should worry about public institutions that treat people as equal. The classic one being the draft, which we no longer have. But there are all sorts of other public institutions. National health care would be another possibility. But that was in the 90s when the economy was booming and we were worried about gee, incomes are growing so fast at the bottom and at the top, and what about the middle? Okay. Then came the aughts, where incomes stopped growing at the bottom. And it seems to me it's very hard to earn enough money to get respect, which is what it's all about, in our society. And basically, economists are debating how to cure that. But we know one technique that is effective, a tight labor market. That's what we had in the late 90s. When people were happy, when anybody showed up for work, they paid them decently. Mm-hmm. It's a market. There's supply and demand. So one way to boost the wages at the bottom of unskilled people, especially African Americans who say they're last hired, first fired, and I think we've learned that there's some truth to that. The one way to do that is to not flood the market with low-wage immigrants. Now, we've been through this. The question you ask is, well, aren't the immigrants people too? Yes, but people get respect by their status in their home societies. So people that come here to earn money could actually have respect back home. They'd probably make more money if they come here, but we're not concerned about money. We're concerned about respect. So the ideal situation is not an open borders situation, but where the entire world can come here and maybe everybody gets rich, but it would be a wildly inegalitarian society looking like Hong Kong or Rio or Calcutta, and the people at the bottom could not look the people at the top in the eye and treat them as equals. So if we want that, we have to have some border control, and that's the idea basis for it. And the emotional basis was I saw the same BS in the welfare that was in the welfare debate recapitulated in the immigration debate, such as, well, gee, if we have high welfare benefits, that's not going to attract people onto welfare. Well, of course, gee, we have.
That would be my dogs. Well, it's too late. I was going to give you a glimpse of them, but they're now down, guarding the, dealing with that.
Always
threat.
Some critique. So anyway, so I thought, well, somebody should expose this BS, and then it became clear to me that there was nobody on our side. We don't have the money. We don't have the media. We don't have the Democratic.
We being people who want to restrict immigration more?
People who want to have some control over the flow of immigration. Then we can have an argument over what the level is. Right. I was always for a relatively high level, but I don't like the idea that we completely lost control and anybody who comes across the border at great risk can get in and stay. Maybe that offends my Germanic.
So you've explained your position. I guess still unexplained is the intensity of your commitment. This has become you 24/7, right? This is all you do on Twitter is tweet about immigration and things you see as related, such as whether Paul Ryan becomes Speaker of the House.
Well, first, it's the biggest undone issue out there. That there's a piece of legislation. Welfare reform was done. It's going to come back, but it was done in '96. Tax reform was done. It's going to come back, but it was done. This was done last time in '86. It's the biggest piece of unpassed, unresolved legislation before Congress. Speaker Boehner, they asked him what his biggest regret was. He said he regrets not passing an immigration bill. So I just refuse to accept that it's a trivial issue that I'm obsessed with. It's, in fact, the issue that a whole lot of Washington is obsessed with. And if you're paranoid like me, Bob, you see a lot of moves that seem to not be about immigration, like putting Paul Ryan in as Speaker, that are really probably largely or
actually the machinations
about immigration. So, it's important, and B, one of the ways you get things done is by being obsessed. If my side wasn't obsessed, we would have lost a long time ago. And see what you got up. This horrible immigration reform bill was coming down the pike. As Trotsky says, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. So if the war is coming down the pike, you have to mobilize for it, or else you lose. You have no choice in the matter.
Okay. So I could critique other aspects of your career over the last 10 years, but I think maybe the way to go is kind of switch back and forth into and out of career critiquing mode, and take the opportunity along the way to talk about related issues, such as the presidential campaign. So you seem more supportive of Donald Trump than, say, a reasonable person should be, for example.
Well, the hope was that somebody, at least in the Republican Party, where the voters tend to, at least a large chunk of them, tend to want control of the borders, would espouse that viewpoint. The only guy that came along was Trump, and he espoused it in such a radical way that
well, yeah, but it's not just radical; it's kind of arguably disgusting. And it's associated with a larger kind of xenophobic impulse, I would say. Like, for example, when that exchange with that guy, when the guy in the crowd in the Q&A said, "So we've got a problem in this country. It's called Islam," and Trump just nods, like as if the Islamic faith. No, I mean he did, and it got worse as he went on. And this is the card he's playing. He's playing a generally xenophobic card.
If you look back at the tape, that's not what he did.
That absolutely is what he did.
You have three choices. You can do what you said he did, which I don't think he did. You can start an argument with the guy, or you can just do what a lot of people do is say, yeah, and you blow them off and get to the next question.
No. Any responsible national politician, when somebody says, we have a problem called Islam, says, let's be clear. The problem is not with Muslims or their religion per se. The problem is with a small number of people who say they're Muslims and blah, 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 and distinguish between Islam and radical Islamism or whatever. It's simply not responsible for a national leader of any kind to let that pass. And he did nod, and he did seem affirmative. He made some little what he said was something like, good first question. And then the guy said something else.
He said good first question sarcastically, Bob, in a way that implied it was not a good first question. You got to look at the tape.
Well, we agree on what happened with the tape, but he did nod. And you can claim he was being sarcastic, but I don't. Look, he's had a month. If he wanted to clarify his position on this, Mickey, and disavow that guy's sentiment, he's had a month. I don't think he has. And similarly with the bait he threw out about rapists, with reference to illegal immigrants, they're raping our women. I mean, that appeals to in the entire playbook of noxious demagogic tropes. They're raping our women is the lowest of the low. Okay, that is the worst.
They're stealing our women is worse, I think. No, if you look at the movie Rising Sun, which was at the peak of anti-Japanese hysteria in America, the theme of that movie was these short little Japanese men are coming over and they're getting all our beautiful women, and they're not even raping them. The women are attracted to them. They're displacing them. I thought that was the lowest of the low in terms of xenophobia.
Well, anyway, it's a close call, but you take my point, right?
But there is a lot of unreported immigrant crime, and he was reflecting a view which I don't think is accurate, which is that somehow the Mexican leaders are purposely sending their worst elements the way Castro opened the prisons during the Mariel boat lift, supposedly. I think it's probably more the latter. We're probably getting some of the best Mexicans. But nevertheless, there's a large number of criminals. And if you read Ann Coulter's book, she makes a pretty convincing case that the media covers it up. Okay? Now, that's all I'll say. I don't think in any way, when Trump first said anything, he sort of implied that they're all rapists, which is insane. And then he has this crazy theory that they're intentionally sending bad people, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of crime there, and probably more crime than in the domestic population. In any case, there shouldn't be any crime. So it was.
But there always is crime, regardless of the demographic, and certainly with relatively low-income people, certain kinds of crime are more likely. And I assume I would bet if you correct for income level, there's less crime.
Well, why correct for income level? if we take in, if suppose low income young men cause a tremendous proportion of crime, but immigrant young men, low income, do proportionally less crime than American low income young men. But if the immigrants are 90% low income young men, you're letting in a whole bunch of crime because most Americans are not low income young men.
Well, if you let in any group of people, you're letting in more crime because there will be crime among any large group of people. But if the corrected for income, it is significantly lower than with the population at large, which, so far as you know, could be the case. I would say you don't have a crisis on your hands. But speaking of Ann Coulter,
but why, if they're 100% low income people and they have a 10% propensity to commit crime, and the average American only has a 1% propensity to commit crime,
they don't have it.
Does it make sense to let in 100% low-income people with that propensity to commit crime, even if American low-income men have a 12% propensity to commit crime? It's a little higher. I don't know that it's higher. I don't trust the scholarship. Somebody's got to look at the data. I don't think we really know.
Until they do, you will not have a killer argument. But speaking of Ann Coulter,
nobody buys this correcting for income BS.
Well, you don't even know that. You don't even know that
academics have come up with.
You're making up numbers. You have no idea what the actual numbers are. You're saying they could be high. You're right. They could be high. You just don't know.
Well, right. What drove Coulter to write a book was that it's impossible to find good statistics on immigration and crime.
So you're assuming the worst and basing your policy position.
No, people since her book has come out, people have tried to find out what the truth is, and there are varying results. Peter Kirstener of the Civil Rights Commission looked at homicide-related people in prison for homicide-related crimes in 3 of the 5 states he looked at. The proportion who were illegal immigrants was higher than the proportion of illegal immigrants in the population. Those states included California and New York, where the disparity was huge. They did not include Florida and Texas. So it's a mixed picture, but there's certainly a lot of evidence out there.
I mean, 3 of 5 is barely more than 50%. I mean, that's almost no picture at all.
But in California, in New York, it was huge. In the other states, it was close. So it was basically a negative picture, but it certainly didn't support the conventional academic meme that immigrants do it less. They don't do it less.
So speaking of Ann Coulter, or would you like to switch to critiquing me?
No, go ahead.
There was a little
Saint Bob. I don't really have that many critiques.
There was a little Twitter outburst by Ann Coulter that you seemed to defend. Remember the "how many effing Jews" tweet?
Oh yeah, I totally defend that.
Yeah. So.
And I think you would defend it too, Bob. She was objecting to this bizarre fixation on Israel.
Right. But there were 2 tweets. The first
Republican candidate.
The first was legit, where she said something like, "To judge by these Republican candidates while watching the debate," she said something like that. You'd think that Israel's security is more important than America's. Something like how Israel centric they were, which is true.
Okay.
But then she followed it with this tweet. How many effing Jews do they think there are? She knew what she was doing with that second tweet. It was not necessary.
No, Bob, because there was a third tweet that came literally 10 seconds after the tweet you said that said, where she realized, no, there are not that many Jews in the Republican electorate. Mm-hmm. She said, oh, it must be the evangelicals they're trying to reach. There's something there, or else it's donors they're trying to reach. I mean, there's some reason why there's this, at the debate, there's this bizarre, they ask, what are your main goals for America in the next 10 years? And they say, we're going to have a secure Israel. Well, you want to secure Israel, but it's not your top goal for America for the next 10 years. And she was talking about how strange that was and trying to figure out, thinking out loud on Twitter, why that was. And are they appealing to the Jews in the audience? Then 10 seconds later, she said, no, they must be trying to appeal to the evangelicals.
She's cannier than to actually think out loud on Twitter. I think she knows
that had the exact feel of a conversation with Ann Coulter, which I've had more of than you. And
it's safe to say.
The exact feel of a conversation playing out on Twitter. And you notice that
it leads to a question, though. It leads to a question. If, like, so she's pro-Trump, you're pro-Trump, and we've already established that
I would like another candidate to come and steal Trump's thunder on immigration,
right,
and do it in a slightly more responsible way and slightly more trustworthy way, because at the last debate, Trump seemed to give away about a third of the store before backtracking post-debate. So Trump is sort of unreliable. I would like somebody reliable, like maybe Senator Sessions, to step up. But nobody has, except for maybe Rick Santorum, who's in the Kitty debate. So
here's what. Okay, but here's the question. Okay, you're stuck with Trump. He's playing the I would say a pretty crude form of the anti-immigrant card. He's playing the Islamophobia card, and Coulter, who's
not playing the Islamophobia. There was a plant in a rally who stood up and said
he's had months to say the right thing about that.
Instead of giving him a PC speech on how it's only some Muslims we worry about, he just blew the guy off and said next question. So he's guilty of that.
He's had time to rectify his lapse if he wanted to. And then anyway, now given that series, that tweet in particular of Ann Coulter's that I highlighted, I mean, the question has been raised as to whether there is a part of Trump's constituency that is kind of like a white nationalist element.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Doesn't that bother you? I mean,
well, there was a part of I was an advocate for welfare reform. There was a part of the anti-welfare constituency that was racist and white nationalist too. It's a tiny part, but what are we going to do? Not have welfare reform because some racists are supported? No, you can't. They're racist on both sides. They're probably more racist on the anti-welfare, anti-immigrant side. So what? That doesn't. It's exactly the equivalent, I think, of tarring all Muslims because of the actions of a few. So you should not play that card. It's a ridiculous card to play unless you can show that a substantial, the constituency for immigration reform is somehow, members of Stormfront. I mean, members of Stormfront exist. I was attacked. There's this there's a good political reporter who turns into he's a Jekyll Hyde character. He turns into a horrible troll at night on Twitter. And he tried to bait me by saying Mickey Kaus getting his orders from Stormfront, which is some sort of white supremacist site. And I tried to ignore him. And then all these guys on Stormfront came to my defense saying, hey, what's wrong with being in Stormfront? Mickey Kaus is right. And thanks for the help, guys.
So you didn't say, hey, that's a notorious anti-Stormfront trope, buddy. You didn't say that?
You can't let yourself be bossed around by these trolls. And that's, you spend all your time issuing PC denials of their baiting. I think that's probably what Trump's philosophy is. Isn't that the standard?
Well, no, but there are known dangerous things in the world. There are known dangerous things in the world, and one of them is like xenophobia, ethnophobia, and so on. And I do think it's incumbent on people to issue the PC clarifications when those kinds of things are at stake.
But Stormfront is not one of the dangers in America. They're like 3 people. Don't worry about them. They're.
No. I think we are seeing signs. Wait. Leave Stormfront aside. I think there are real signs that Islamophobia is growing to alarming proportions. There are little crimes happening that don't get much attention. I mean, like a week or two ago in some college campus, some Muslim woman was sitting there. She had her head covering. Some guy walks in, grabs her head, slams it on the table. And, and I think it's a real concern. I won't get into all this, but it interacts with the whole terrorism issue in a very unproductive way, I would say, and only exacerbates the problem. Islamophobia, that is. So anyway, you're fine with, okay, so it's not as if, I was wondering what's happened to your Twitter feed as you focused more and more on immigration and your Twitter following, on immigration and become more and more of an activist, a leader, not like a journalist commenting or even a pundit, but an activist saying, come on, it's not too late to call your congressman's office and keep Paul Ryan from being elected Speaker of the House. And that, in general, I mean, haven't you found more kind of more people on your Twitter among your Twitter following that you're really not delighted to be associated with, or not?
No, I actually don't know who's on my Twitter following. Immigration was not a very attractive issue, so when you start blogging about immigration, you tend to lose followers. But maybe
that's what I mean.
I've now settled down to people who are actually interested in the topic. But I don't sense that my followers are horrible, Islamophobic racists. I sense my followers they seem actually quite sane people, and the people who are my ideological allies in this fight in Washington, the Numbers USA people and the Center for Immigration Studies, are all very civilized, cultured, non-racist people, and they're not even the Numbers USA head isn't even a Republican; he's a Democrat. Their big thing is wage lowering for Americans. So a traditional left wing position, or it used to be. So I do not sense that. Am I repelled by the people who support me? A small percentage of them, but generally no, not at all.
Well, that's the end of my career critique, except for a specific misstep or two you've committed, which I'll save for later. But as long as we're in the presidential thing, it's looking to me like, I mean, a lot of people have started saying, well, Rubio's the actual favorite. It's looking to me like it may well be Rubio, which is alarming to me because he is by far, well, he is the neoconiest one. So foreign policy-wise, it's a disaster for me to see a Rubio presidency. Not that the alternative in the form of Hillary is all that refreshing, because she's kind of neocon light, but does it look to you like Rubio's the guy?
Well, there's a sort of there's a media / Republican conspiracy going on right now to sort of drive Jeb Bush from the race and to give Rubio momentum, which was previously invisible in the polls and fundraising.
I mean, the neocons are leading, but they may not be leading. But like David Brooks, what's the name of that woman you briefly did a podcast with at the Washington Post, Jennifer?
Well, Jennifer Rubin.
Yeah, I mean, the neocons are totally on message with Rubio.
Them. It's also the reformicons, like Con Carroll and Rehan and.
Well, yeah, when they see the alternative being Ben Carson and Donald Trump.
Well, no, Rubio is I think they've always been sympathetic for Rubio because Rubio's plans are sympathetic to them. So what they're
in what way?
Well, I think he likes their plans for increasing this tax credit, and I don't know quite exactly what the details of their plans are, but I think his list of reforms is largely taken from them. Mm-hmm. So if you're Ross Douthat or Rayhan's, you're going to be naturally sympathetic to the guy who's sympathetic to you, and so it's not just neocon foreign policy people. I don't think those people are neocons on foreign policy. Anyway,
I would say neither of those are anti-neo. I mean Ross and Raihan is, I think, neocon-ish, and then Con Carroll is not a neocon per se, but I think he's not as far removed as I'd like. There are Republicans, there used to be at least, who are quite almost anti-neocon on foreign policy, although God knows those are endangered species, and none of the people you mentioned are those.
What I'm saying is Rubio, unfortunately, has broader appeal than just neocons on foreign policy, and the conspiracy to make him not the front runner, but the up and comer now is broader than just neocons.
I think it's becoming an establishment campaign because Jeb Bush looks so hapless, and there's no clear alternative other than Rubio once you remove Bush to Trump or Carson, which I think they rightly find, both of which they rightly find problematic because neither of them could beat Hillary for one thing, and they're both just loose cannons.
I think Rubio has a problem beating Hillary. He's incredibly talented and incredibly slick, and he manages to lie without quite lying. So I'm constantly having to use the word dissemble instead of lie because he's giving a false impression, but he's not actually 100% factually lying.
Mm-hmm.
Or usually he'll lie when necessary. So all that's true. He talks in a language that people can understand. But he seems very callow. He seems a little unsure of himself. He's not calm in crisis. Hillary will project that. You know what you're getting. You're getting maybe bad decisions, like the Libya intervention, but she's calm and she'll sort of know what she's doing as she makes these bad decisions.
But when will this contrast manifest itself? He seems calm enough in debate. Wasn't he calm when he dispatched Bush in this last debate?
Yeah, he was prepared for that. There have been various points where he's frozen in the headlights and he seems panicked. And the sweat thing that Trump has hit on is part of that. He seems to sweat in a crisis when he's unprepared. That's just my impression of the guy. I don't know him well. And supposedly also there's all sorts of dirt on him, which we haven't seen yet.
We hope so, but I think he's already been a little vetted. I mean, Times looked into it. It did a kind of anti-Rubio piece about a year ago, and it wasn't nothing, but it wasn't, what somebody like me would love to see.
No, I agree. You would think it would come out. On the other hand, and if you saw this Bush memo on Rubio that was leaked, I think yesterday, it sounded like they basically don't have much at all.
Was that the one where he said he's like Obama? I mean, that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I mean, it's just a stupid thing to say to donors. He's just like Obama, because you may recall Obama won the election.
Right? That was pointed out. It had a bunch of stuff like his use of a credit card, like he bought a house with this guy and defaulted. There's somebody in his family has drug dealing connections. I forget the exact, not him, but somebody who's not close to so all that has come out.
I don't think they hold the last thing against him.
That.
I don't think anybody thinks you're responsible for what your relatives do.
Right. That's why it hasn't damaged him. But
and the other stuff had been out there for a while. I don't know. I fear that he may be. I think he will get the nomination. I fear that he could be formidable in a general. I don't think that Ted Cruz could get the nomination realistically.
No, I agree, because he just seems so unlikable.
He's too weird. He's just too weird.
I mean, he's incredibly smart. I mean,
he's very smart. He's totally ruthless and demagogic. The resemblance to Joseph McCarthy is so uncanny. He looks like him. He talks like him. His tactics are like McCarthy's. It's unbelievable. Except he's smarter than McCarthy and not a drunk, unlike McCarthy.
Well, it is totally weird, because he's the guy who could have seized the immigration issue and done it in a less sort of outlandish way or demagogic way than maybe Trump did, at least initially. Trump has simmered down, but he didn't, because he believes in large legal immigration, and so he's sort of getting a lot of money from rich people who also want large amounts of legal immigration, visas, and guest workers. And so I guess he felt constrained, and he thought he was smart enough to get away with sort of a half critique about illegal immigration. But that avenue is still open to him. He could still basically put the rest of the field on the defensive on the immigration issue. As we've seen, you may think it's trivial for Mickey to waste his life on, but it's a big deal to a lot of the Republican electorate about, maybe not a majority, maybe only 40%, but they feel it very intensely. And if Cruz plays that card, he could get farther than we think. I agree with you. Ultimately, he seems too weird. Part of it is when he tries to be nice, he should just flat out be nasty. Why he tries to be nice, and he has this ingratiating. I don't know if Uriah Heep is the right word, but he has this obviously phony niceness. He should just let it loose and just excoriate people. But he really is philosophy. I was on a welfare call, I don't know why. I used to be interested in welfare reform before immigration. And Ed Gillespie was on it, Ed Gillespie's considered one of the great policy geniuses of the Republican Party. He was almost elected governor of Virginia, might might be elected senator or governor again. He was a big player in welfare reform, and Ted Cruz was on it, having done no preparation and knowing nothing about welfare. And Cruz was 10 times smarter and more articulate than Ed Gillespie. It was unbelievable. At the debate, when Cruz played back all the things, the nasty questions that had been said about the Republican candidates by the moderators, just sort of off the top of his head, I mean, that was impressive. Nobody else pulled that off. They were all canned. This was not canned.
He's very smart.
So I agree. Christie is an alternative. He was quite good in the debate.
Oh, he's hopeless.
But he's hopeless now. I agree.
His approval in New Jersey is like 35%. He's got Bridgegate. And, otherwise, who is actually, I think, the person with the best chance to win the general in the whole Republican field? You can probably guess this.
Carly Fiorina.
No, John Kasich.
If he can get to the general, but he can't.
Exactly, but he maybe not. But he is a very appealing candidate.
No, it's not. He has a personality that does not wear well over time.
I think you don't. I think
he's morally superior. The reputation in Ohio is that he's a jerk. He's very popular in Ohio because the Ohio economy is booming. But it's not because of his personality.
I think he comes off. I mean, maybe it would wear out, and he would start doing noxious things. But I think he comes off with this kind of Midwestern authenticity that appeals to Americans. I think he looks a hell of a lot more authentic than about 3/4 of the field.
He's incredibly self-righteous. I remember during the welfare reform debate, they gave, the final speeches on the floor. They gave Kasich the last speech. Mm-hmm. And for every minute he talked, we lost 10 votes. He was just so self-righteous. He was just turning off people right and left. I think finally they got a hook and took him off, and we barely won. But it was, he's just, this idea that he is appealing is a myth.
Okay, I retract what I said. I always bow to your superior political.
I mean, the only appealing thing about him, I thought it was bad at the time, is the guy likes to watch cartoons in the middle of markups of bills. So he'll be like marking up a bill and say, "Hey, did you see that he dropped an anvil on his head?" I mean, that's the sort of thing that maybe a normal person would do. It was not.
I think it's refreshing.
It was not appreciated by the people involved in the makeup of the welfare bill at the time.
Huh.
They thought he should focus on the bill. But anyway, yes. There's this push for Rubio. I hope it, there was a push for Fiorina too. She did well in the debates, and now she's going to surge. And John Podhoretz wrote a column saying she'll soon be atop of the polls. Well, that turned out not to be true. Rubio has a little more heft behind him, but it could also be true that he doesn't, reach the top of the polls too. And it could be that Trump wins, and I'm trying to figure out.
I don't see that. I think he's reached his ceiling. Although, of course, once it's down to two people, pretty much everyone's ceiling rises. But it's hard to imagine. I just think too many people have the attitude that I think you should have, which is that wouldn't it be embarrassing if that guy were president? I mean, give me a break.
People said the same thing it's very similar to the Schwarzenegger run. People would say, "Oh, well, he's this action. He's a bodybuilder and an action movie star, and gee, he does seem to be kind of smart, but." But he'll never be governor. And then, he convinced people that he was a sort of macho character who could get things done, and he won. It turns out he was a
But he didn't say nearly as many obnoxious and seemingly impolitic things as Trump. Now, I realize that in this election cycle, impolitic is politic for a significant constituency because people are so fed up of Washington fakeness. That's true. But I think, just a comparison between Schwarzenegger. I'd much rather have Schwarzenegger representing America at the United Nations. God, can you imagine Trump at the UN?
That's largely because Schwarzenegger got his ears clipped halfway through his term and sort of became much more democratic. So he became much more palatable. There was a legitimate groping scandal, which a personal scandal of which. There are not so many scandals about Trump that gave people pause about Schwarzenegger, and it should have given pause. I mean, some of the character traits he showed in the groping scandal served him ill as governor. So it should have given people much more pause. But they're different characters. All I'm saying is people go from being comic book figures to actual contenders and then actual elected officials. It happens a lot, and it's happened a lot recently. I don't know. So I wouldn't discount it. And, Trump's craziness is part of his negotiating strategy, obviously. I tend to see this whole mass deportation idea, which isn't completely crazy. It's been proposed by many respectable figures like Mike Pence, governor of Indiana, as in part a bargaining strategy. I mean, he talks crazy and then he settles for uncrazy.
The idea he's a great bargainer. We shouldn't spend all the time on Trump, but I heard it reported that if you had, I don't know if we have the numbers to actually do the math, but I read somewhere that some reputable person looked at the amount of money he inherited. I don't know if we really know that, but from his father, and noted that if you had just put that in an index mutual fund, so it tracked the S&P or the Dow or something, he would be richer than he is now. So in other words, he's basically lost money in effect. He could have just put it in an index fund and he'd be richer than he is. He's no kind of master, that's just total bullshit.
I'm not sure. I don't know that. I hear otherwise, but you could be right.
I mean, when you inherit that much money, it's not that easy to screw it up. So, what else? What else? Continue with a career critique, or
well, you finished is it your fifth book?
My fifth book is there's a draft of it finished. I'm revising it in light of the editor's feedback. But
it's about Buddhism. Am I allowed to talk about this?
Yeah, kind of. It's about it's a defense of Buddhist philosophy and, by implication, Buddhist meditation, at least certain forms of it, from a standpoint of evolutionary psychology. It's an argument that this really, the Buddhist enlightenment really would be enlightenment.
Is Buddhism under attack?
No, but this particular, I'm not aware of anyone having made this particular argument from actual evolutionary psychology. But no, well, actually, there is a backlash. There is a mindfulness meditation backlash. Now, we could argue about how closely associated modern mindfulness meditation actually is with historical Buddhism, but setting that aside, there was like an op-ed, New York Times piece, kind of trashing mindfulness meditation, and then a study was tweeted around that said mindfulness meditation actually has bad effects. I think people are getting sick of hearing so much about it, so there's a natural kind of backlash against it. There is that, but
I find daydreaming is very productive, and daydreaming is the enemy of mindfulness, right? I think that's what the New York Times article says.
They may have said that. I don't think when you're daydreaming, you're not technically being mindful, but I don't know of anyone that's advocating being mindful in that thoroughgoing a sense 24/7.
Okay. But here, I guess my critique is, I found all your books very, all your books are great. They've also helped me in teaching me how to live my life, although I'm less enamored of the idea that I'm this tiny pawn in this vast historical thrust toward complexity and and universal consciousness. It was nice to know when I read Nonzero that I could see myself as a tiny cog in this machine. I'm not sure I want to be a cog in any machine.
You don't want to be a neuron in the global brain.
Yes, but why don't you start become an activist? Don't be just this laid back.
I like that idea, kind of, but.
Start a religion. Start a chain of Bob Wright meditation centers. Look at this guy Bikram. He figured out how to do yoga at 130 degrees, and all of a sudden he's a cult figure. You could be a cult figure, Bob. You could be standing up there.
You know what I should do?
With thousands of adoring people as you lead them in Bob Wright meditation.
You know what I should do? 131 degrees and above. It's like The Price is Right. Right? The guy says $130. You say, I'll take 131.
I don't know if it's exactly 130. I just made that up. But it's somewhere around there.
Well, look, I am, it's funny. I'm at the stage of my career where I like kind of the idea of following in your footsteps in the very limited sense of becoming more of an activist, because I'm very frustrated about American foreign policy in particular, and specific kinds of delusions that accompany it. But I can't really figure out, like, what to do to motivate people. It's very hard to get people very interested in foreign policy per se.
Well, can we go into your? This is a good time to go into your doubts about the American foreign policy, and
we could
had some brilliant career advice that comes out of that for how you can promote yourself.
Okay, good. I'm in favor of promoting myself in principle. I just have never stumbled on the magic formula. No, I mean, in a way, my frustration with American foreign policy is that partly just that it's now dominated by neocons and liberal interventionists. A formerly influential school in American thought is now almost extinct, by which I mean realism. And classic realism had its downside. For example, Henry Kissinger was a realist, but there's a lot of it that I think is worth preserving, and I have actually written an advocacy of something called progressive realism, which would take the best of realism and maybe wed it to progressive values, or more just like update it to the modern world when you have threats from non-state actors and where I think hatred is public enemy number one, and so on. And a central part of realism has always been, and this is the thing that I think is kind of generically missing from a lot of American foreign policy and a lot of life in general, is the ability to look at things from the point of view of every player, of Putin, of young jihadist, of young person who may be recruited to become a jihadist. No matter how noxious you find them, it is actually in your interest, I'd argue, to be able to understand how the world actually looks to them. And this is not like empathy in the sense of like feeling their pain, although it can lead to that in some cases. It's more like what's called cognitive empathy or perspective taking, just the ability to see things from the point of view of other people. And, you know, so if I mean, there's various forms of activism. There's like lobby for specific foreign policy. That's one thing. But if I could, in a more, I don't know if you'd call this like a spiritual frame or what, but if there's something more generic than foreign policy per se that I would want to encourage, is this very thing. Just get people better at and more inclined to look at things from the...
But you're not being very empathetic to the neocons. Do you really think that a neocon doesn't realize? I mean, their whole theory is, we should be the strong horse. Part of their theory is we should be the strong horse. Do you think they don't realize that in the minds of potential jihadis, they are drawn to the strong horse as opposed to the weak horse? They are putting themselves in their mind. They're somebody who...
No. But there's neocons. Many neocons. And they're not alone in this. I mean, I would say liberal interventionists do a certain amount of this. Describe the world in a way that discourages people from seeing things from the point of view. A good example is Julia Ioffe. For a while, she was at the New Republic right before its implosion and resurrection. And I don't know whether you'd call her more of a neocon or a liberal interventionist. She's probably on the border somewhere. But she wrote a piece during the Ukraine thing saying, Putin is crazy. Putin is crazy. That's just so stupid. That's just so, I'm sorry, we have to pause and reflect on this. That is such a stupid thing to say. It is so easy to come up with a number of plausible interpretations of his behavior that explain it as being either in his political interest, which it certainly has been for a while at least, or even in Russia's strategic interest. And when you say someone's crazy, if you can convince people of that, they're not going to say, well, what's it like to be Putin, except to imagine him as this crazy person. And the same goes with the word evil, Mickey, which is a favorite among neocons, is he's evil, he's evil. Once you start imagining somebody inhabited by this evil force, it's the same as thinking they're crazy. You're just not going to actually do the work of imagining how things look from their point of view. And if we had started putting ourselves in Putin's shoes a long time ago, the Ukraine thing could have been wholly prevented.
No, I agree. The Ukraine thing is a very good case for your argument. I don't understand why nobody has said. I think somebody has said it, but I don't think Obama has said it. Putin has a point about Ukraine. Why did Europe sort of pick this fight with him? We
totally.
said, there was an elected president. He was a crook, but he was elected. And then the people in the Maidan who were not elected protested against him. And somehow Europe tried to say, okay, now we're ascending. We're going to pry Ukraine from Russia's orbit. Why did they pick that fight? There was no reason to pick that fight.
Right. And not only that, but what's the name of the woman? She's Bob Kagan's wife, which might lead you to suspect she has conceivably some neocon sympathies. But anyway, for reasons unknown to me, she became an influential player in the State Department. She was stationed in Ukraine, and she was A, passing out cookies to the protesters, but B, she was, the Soviet Union, Putin, they released this tape. They tapped a phone call in which she was orchestrating, which could have plausibly sounded to Putin, quite plausibly, as her orchestrating a coup. Because she was discussing, well, who should take over in Ukraine? Lo and behold, it turned out to be the guy who did. I mean, so for them to see this as foreign meddling was far from crazy. And don't get me started. But
I don't understand, why doesn't Obama give a public talk with Putin where he acknowledges Putin's legitimate gripes? Wouldn't that go a long way?
Because it's a political loser, but precisely because of what I'm saying.
Loser. He's done everything possible that's a political loser. He's pulled out of Iraq and caused, complete chaos in the Middle East. You can't. How could that be popular? Whereas actually saying the truth in a way that seems to, acknowledge Putin's legitimate gripes would be unpopular.
Well, in terms of the foreign policy elite, the reception in kind of the foreign policy press among foreign policy pundits, like I said, the realists are gone. So, and this gets to Syria too. So he's dealing, to the extent that he cares about how whatever he says is going to be received by the foreign policy elite, which mediates the message that then filters down to the grassroots, okay, he's got a problem. There are no realists left virtually in the American foreign policy firmament. It's all liberal interventionists, liberal purists, and neocons. And this is why, this is, I think, the reason that he may, well, the option that in Syria he closed off early when he said Assad must go, that hugely constrained the prospects for a negotiated
solution. That was a mistake, but I don't see how you can say that his policy in Syria is interventionist. It seems to me he learned his lesson in Libya, and he's now being non-interventionist and being extremely.
What I'm saying,
the rationale for it is basically we're out of Iraq. Iran is going to have more power. Let them all fight it out. We'll stay out of it, and it's not going to hurt us.
What I'm saying is,
how is that?
What I'm saying is, if realists were more influential in American foreign policy discourse, there's at least a chance that rather than say Assad must go, which basically foreclosed the chance of a negotiated solution, no leader's going to negotiate his own demise. Obama might have said, we may have to do a deal with Assad. It may result in the partition of Syria. It may result in something else, but it would stop the bloodshed. And he could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. I'm not saying that definitely could have been done, but it was the most plausible path to saving hundreds of thousands of lives, and he didn't do it. And the reason he didn't do it is there's no tolerance for that kind of rationality in American foreign policy discourse. It's neocons and liberal purists who just have,
But he is coming around to that now. Aren't they convening some conference right now? Where
a 250,000 lives down the road and a ton of chaos that's going to have ramifications forever and is going to create enough terrorism to keep neocons in office in America for another 50 years.
I just don't see how you can say that Obama's actual policy now is in any way interventionist.
I didn't say it was interventionist, Mickey.
Well,
I said it wasn't realist.
You said liberal interventionists are the only voice.
I mean, it isn't interventionist. It isn't interventionist.
Who are doing what we're actually doing. which is not liberal interventionism anymore.
No. But part of their world, there's the same kind of puritanical streak among a lot of liberals that there is among the neocons in terms of abiding the possibility that somewhere in the world, some leader who doesn't totally live up with the American values that, by the way, we ourselves often violate, that such leaders will be allowed to stay in power when there's any opportunity of unseating them. Now, every time we unseat a ruler, chaos ensues, and you would think we would slowly be learning that, but no.
You know what public figure has espoused your viewpoint and said,
you are closing out on the one redeeming feature of Donald Trump.
His name is Donald Trump.
I know that. He said said we would be better off if Saddam Hussein were still in power. And he may be right, although I'd say if we had left Saddam Hussein to his own devices, he might not still be in power.
That's what he means. But he is the only person saying what you're saying for the reasons that you're saying it. So
he does have a realist instinct in foreign policy. God bless him for that, although I don't think it justifies the rest of the package.
Okay. Well,
so, Mickey, how have you succeeded in getting me to act like the old Bob here? This was some kind of trick where I start screaming and saying extreme things that I'll get taken to task for in the comment section.
That's what they want.
That is what they want. But I don't want to give it to them. I want to be a distinguished. I'm moving into the sage phase of my career, hence the beard. And I want to say reasoned, moderate things.
I think don't you have to come up with a name like Baba Ram Bob? Or some sort of we have to give you an honorific name to recognize your sageness.
And maybe lose the blue Oxford shirt.
It could be you could be like Normcore. You could be you're so normal that you're hip. That I like your idea of you wanted to drive a Buick station wagon. That was nobody wants to drive a Buick.
Do you remember that phase of my life?
They don't even exist, and you could sort of be the Bob from the 50s who's a Buddhist.
Man, nothing but telemarketers these days.
It's a niche that's unoccupied.
Really seriously, Mickey, offline sometime, I need to consult with you on how to be an activist because it's
I recommend, I think, separating the touchy-feely Bob from the foreign policy realist Bob.
Well,
you're trying to combine them and saying xenophobia and hatred is a big problem in the world. I say, fight xenophobia and hatred in your sort of quasi-spiritual writings, but keep it out of foreign policy because people just laugh at that. You got to be taken seriously, so you want to.
So wait, you're saying I should continue to have a presence in both realms? Well, not that I have a presence in either right now, but you're saying pursue both paths but have separate messages or quit trying to write about foreign policy?
The foreign policy message is obviously informed by the touchy-feely message.
Right.
But keep the Buddhism in the closet for them. And just be So
have a blue Oxford shirt that I wear some places.
Sorry?
So have a blue Oxford shirt that I wear some places. But
don't try to combine it all into one grand thing.
No, I'm with you there. I try to make but oh well. I don't want to turn this into something all about Bob. Let's make it all about Milo. Milo. Can you see Milo?
Yes, he looks actually adorable.
Milo is a cutie. But he's not the dog. I apologize to podcast listeners. We're looking at a very cute dog. He's not the dog that Blogging Heads viewers remembers from so long ago. Do you remember the name of that dog?
That was Frazier. What happened to him?
Hey, Frazier. Come here, puppy. Come here.
There he is.
Come here, buddy.
Okay.
Yeah, you know why he's wagging his tail? Because the phrase "come here, puppy" is so often followed by shredded wheat. So
I thought because he's getting respect, Bob, and respect.
Okay, you ready? Come here. There you go.
You're disproving my theory. They seem to be interested in food, not respect.
Well, they're dogs, Mickey.
Well, don't we share 99% of our DNA with them?
I think that's chimpanzees, and even that number is misleading.
This is a digression, but through a conservative friend of mine, I've come into contact with a couple of anti-Darwinists who are quite interesting.
Uh-huh.
they believe in genetics. They believe in Mendel. They believe traits are inherited. They just don't believe in evolution, which is they don't believe in any new species or limbs for some reason. Or organs.
Limbs in the sense of appendages, or in the sense of like limbs on the taxonomic chart.
I think appendages.
They don't believe appendages exist.
Like they don't think the eye evolved evolution through evolution.
These sound like intelligent design people.
Well, they are.
Oh.
But they're not. The one I met was a non-religious intelligent design person. Anyway, but my point is, even they leave room for evolutionary psychology, because if you inherit mental traits, however they came into being, even if they're not new mental traits that develop from evolution, even if the brain was ordained by God, it evolved according to genetics, which means that evolutionary psychology is still a working thing. It still could be happening, even in the intelligent design world, because obviously people that have the traits that lead them to have more offspring will genetically transmit those traits to their kids.
So you mean even if the traits are like acquired through the environmental interaction or something? In other words, they're Lamarckian, or they're like...
No, they believe in genetics. They're inherited.
Yeah. Well, it's true that genes, well...
They distinguish between genetics and evolution, and they believe in genetics, and that opens the door for your entire book, The Moral Animal, basically.
We'll have them read it.
I tried. No, I mean, I will, but I think they're familiar with evolutionary psychology, and if not, your unique contribution. So, all I'm saying is that was interesting. They weren't completely crazy.
So, Mickey, we're setting a record for duration of this, but I say, let's go with it. Because I want to make another, I want to critique a specific step in your career, but go ahead.
That's fine. It's weird. I did this podcast with some comedy people, and they said their podcasts routinely run 3 hours.
You see this.
People like them long.
You see this.
Seems absolutely insane to me.
What that happens with is... And I've seen some of this on the aforementioned twit. When there are regular personalities, like it's not a different two people each week, but it's a regular, you come to, it's not quite an addiction, but you just become comfortable with the interaction. It's like almost junk food. You're taking a walk and, oh yeah, that would feel nice to be in the company of these people I like. And you do see these kinds of podcasts go on for a couple of hours.
I guess that's what passes for friendship in our atomized society.
And
podcasting alone. Wait till Robert Putnam gets a hold of this. I mean, we don't have friends anymore. We have podcasts. I tell you.
Maybe he should have a podcast, although I think there's possibly a limit to the subscriber base.
He's a very impressive dude.
He is.
So I would love to hear his podcast.
Although I favorably reviewed his book for the New York Times.
He plays an important role in Ann Coulter's book, you realize.
She's pro-community? He's the guy who wrote Bowling Alone, we should say, which is not the book I reviewed. But anyway.
He discovered that diversity actually reduced levels of trust and altruism and all sorts of good things, whereas ethnic homogeneity promoted them. And it's people in diverse communities not only didn't trust other people in other communities, they didn't trust anybody.
So Ann Coulter concluded that America should be like Norway, where everyone is blonde?
Correct.
Yes, and that would include her. So, bad news for you, but hey, ideological consistency has its cost. Yeah, I was going to critique your... So this was so Mickey-esque, this particular misstep. So you decide to run for Senate in California. I'm not critiquing that itself. Could have worked, I guess. But your goal was to just raise issues anyway, possibly including immigration. So you enrolled in the California Democratic primary for Senate, as I recall, correct?
Right.
So far, so good. First misstep was to publicly announce that you had no intention of actually winning, which gave them an excuse to exclude you from the primary, which largely thwarted your goal of being part of the dialogue and influencing it.
They would have excluded me anyway, but yes, that was a mistake.
But here was the classically Mickey mistake. Slate wanted you to blog the campaign, and in a fit of conscientiousness, this is the classically Mickey part, And by the way, personality psychologists have shown that there's such a high correlation between conscientiousness and neuroticism that we might think of the traits as one and the same. In any event, Mickey, let's call it conscientiousness in your case, even if that turns out to be a euphemism. You said, well, no, there might be something illegal or immoral about like running for, well, blah, 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 right? And so you said you had to resign from Slate to run for office. Have you forgotten this? I can understand how you might have repressed it.
It's coming back to me. If I blogged for Slate, that would have made all the difference. The problem with my campaign is
here's the problem.
I spend much too much time on the web. It was sort of it turned into a piece of performance art where I said, hey, let's see how many votes you can get just by hanging around your house and trying to organize people on the web and doing things like blogging, as opposed to actually traveling around the state holding, a press conference a day where you try to attract press. And the answer is you get 5% of the vote. If you want more of the vote, you have to give up on the web. At least at the moment, the web is not so dominant. And, that was my mistake. I didn't spend more time on the web blogging for Slate. It's that I spent too much.
No, but my point is, if you'd stayed at Slate, then after your futile campaign, you would have still been at Slate. And
after my futile campaign, Slate offered me a job.
Yeah, but you were no longer grandfathered in at a ridiculously high salary that had seemed to make sense in the 1990s.
Well, right. They adjusted it downward to what the actual market rate was.
Of course. And that led you to look for greener pastures and leave Slate.
I looked for people who didn't have such a realistic view of the value of bloggers. But
that's true. You went to Newsweek, actually. This was before the day.
But the people who clung to their grandfathered high salaries got laid off. So, I mean,
did they?
You die one way and die another. Well, I think Slate did the classic Washington Post thing, which is, we have these old guys hanging around. Their salaries have gotten up there pretty high, and we like them, but we can't afford their salary anymore. So we'll lay them off, and we'll throw in a young person too, so it doesn't look like we're being ageist. They laid off good people, and it was probably because they couldn't afford them. So if you stick with the salary I had, you're great until you get the guillotine, and then they axe you. So okay. I don't think that's the solution.
I take it back. I was thinking if you'd stayed at Slate, they would have said, "Hey, Mickey, you can't do immigration 24/7 and still get this high salary." You might have said, "Okay, I won't do immigration 24/7," which would have pleased me. But I take it all back. I was wrong.
I was already sort of doing immigration 24/7. Plus, Mike Kinsley tried that. He said, Mickey, why don't you set aside one of every 3 pieces you write about welfare and just don't publish it? And I said, but Mike, I already do that. He gave up. I mean, it's not obsessions aren't necessarily a bad thing, I think, for publications, as long as you have a variety of contributors. The old columnist idea where you're one of the 3 columnists in the world, so you better cover the waterfront. Well, those days are gone. Nobody's one of the 3 columnists in the world, unless you're David Brooks, unless you're a New York Times editorial page columnist. You might as well be obsessed. What the hell? That's another way to have a following. But so I reject this bit of career. I made a lot of mistakes, including in that campaign, but not blogging for Slate was not one of them.
Okay, I take it back. So what's the rest of your critique of my career?
I don't have a critique of your career. My critique is that you haven't founded a religion or a movement, either a monetary. You write these great books that teach people how to live, but you don't do any proselytizing.
I know. I'm exploring ways to proselytize, and it's turning out to be.
There should be a franchise Bob Wright outlet in every shopping mall in America.
Proselytizing is hard. And there are certain forms of it that are just not compatible with the way I am. It's hard.
But if you really think what you're doing is going to improve the world,
yes,
I think you have an obligation to try.
I agree, but we should
hire a charismatic frontman.
We should discuss this offline.
Maybe hire a charismatic frontman.
Yeah, well, I hear you're looking for work.
I don't think.
Oh, charismatic. Never mind.
Sorry?
Never nothing. I said, "Oh, you said charismatic." Never mind. That was really gratuitous. The joke was in fine shape without adding that on top of it. I'm sorry. I apologize.
So we were going to talk about ill drifts, ways we think that the nation is drifting in bad ways or good ways. But we've covered yours, which is...
We've covered my main one, yeah.
Okay.
And we know what your main one is, but you must have a secondary one.
What do you think my main one is?
The influx of immigrants unbidden by you.
You're so wrong, Bob. You have such a limited, condescending view of what I would care about. I care about, it seems to me, actually this ties together all my phobias.
Excellent. So this is health related.
No.
There's a germ, there's a bacterium in this sphere. What is that bacterium, Mickey?
There's no bacterium, but
it's viral?
There's no bacterium, there's no prion, there's no allergen. It's, like many people, it seems to be inevitable that robots will take over a lot of work that we Americans now do. Yes, it has never happened before.
Wait, I can already see how this is going to back into the immigration issue, Mickey. I am like 3 steps ahead of you. I see this. Can we skip the middle part and just get to the idea that this will reduce the number of low-income jobs, and so we can afford less than ever to accept relatively uneducated immigrants? Is that what you're going to say?
The point of welfare reform is everybody's got to work. We should arrange society so that if you work, you earn a decent enough living to live a life of respect. But if there's no work because robots have taken all the work, that doesn't sort of that dogma doesn't fit, because there is no remunerative work for people to find. Ergo, it leads inevitably to calls for a guaranteed income. In other words, the robots do all the work. People just get a check from the government reflecting the bounty of our technology, but they don't really have to work, and you can just see the thrust for a guaranteed income reviving after being, I thought, put to rest during the Nixon era, on the left and the right. On the left, you can see it at Vox.com. Guys like Dylan Matthews and I think Ezra Klein are promoting it, and certainly Matt Iglesias. They have a whole sort of cult of the guaranteed income. They call it something else. And on the right, you can see it in Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan's new welfare plan. He's enamored of David Cameron's cashing out of all welfare programs into a single sort of government check, which is then given to poor people with strings attached. And it turns out that Paul Ryan's strings are pretty weak. You have to show them.
I would imagine the amount of cash would wind up being pretty small, too, but go ahead.
Well, he does the usual thing, which is you bundle it all into a block grant and expect the states to cut it more efficiently, which is bogus. Yes, so I suspect his check would be small, but it's still a check and it's enough to live on. And the requirement is you have to show that you're looking for work. Well, that's the test for unemployment compensation. We know how easy that is to game. You have 3 fake employers. You take the bureau. Yeah, I called these 3 people and they couldn't hire me, so give me the check. And so it inevitably degenerates into a de facto guaranteed income. He's denied this, but it's sort of obvious to a whole bunch of people that that's where he's heading. And the original proponent of the guaranteed income, of course, was Milton Friedman. So if you're a libertarian economist, that wouldn't be unfamiliar to you. And Charles Murray has, in fact, promoted a form of that. So the left and the right are converging on this society where nobody does any work, everybody gets a check. And, Bob, we're adding in hundreds of thousands and millions of unskilled immigrants who won't be able to find work.
Gosh, so I hadn't dreamed you were going to go there with this, Mickey.
They'll be in the mix, too, and they'll take what few jobs are left and drive down the ways for those jobs. So maybe there's a certain rationale for it, because if there's no work for anybody, we sort of don't worry what the wage is for the work, since nobody can find any work, and we have all these immigrants hanging around, but they're not working either. But that's okay. Americans aren't working either. We've given up on work. So maybe it all makes sense that open borders brings a bunch of people here who don't work, and they might as well not work in America if Americans aren't working. And the whole issue of work and wages is just sort of taken out of the equation. But it seems to me this is still a dystopia, because evolutionarily, we are designed for work. We are unhappy when we're not working. We become a sociopathic bachelor herd wandering around, and this is the sort of central problem that that we're going to face in coming decades is what do we do with all these people who who have no productive work? They need to be centered, but are we going to modify them genetically? Is there some trick for that? Are we going to all become alt country rock bands and poets and spoken word artists? So that's the dystopia I'm worried about.
Okay.
And there is an academic there was actually a pretty good article by my friend Brad DeLong in the Milken Institute website.
Why is he your friend? You don't agree on any actual policies, do you?
Well, we don't disagree. He's not my friend. He hates me because I tried to destroy.
That's what I thought. I thought he hated you. But aside from that, your friendship is in good shape?
I was joking. I was being ironic. But
I see. Okay.
He's a Jekyll Hyde character. He has a good side and a bad side, and the good side is in this article. And there is, one of the major thrusts of what the hell is going wrong with the economy is, I think, there's a man at MIT with an unpronounceable name who is the lead academic on this, who's written a bunch of books. But one fear is, I think, that the underlying this, there are all these academics which he goes through and saying, what's wrong with the economy? We don't know. We don't have any economic tools in our toolbox that deal with what seems to be happening with the current economy. I assume one fear is that maybe there's something long-term structurally wrong with the economy because our economy just doesn't need that much work anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to generate the full employment that we need to give everybody a life of dignity with the current capitalist economy. So that's this fear sort of ties together a lot of other fears.
Well, I mean, I think these things tend to be a little overblown in the sense that we're not going to arrive anytime soon at a situation where all the work is done by robots and the robots write the programs for the robots, and so there's no work for anybody. I do think there's a danger that, income inequality will continue to grow partly for technological reasons, and you will have this situation where there are real extremes of affluence, and moreover, the main thing done at the lower income levels is serve the rich people in ways that are, not necessarily degrading, but really drive home the differential in power. So you're doing their garden, you're cleaning their bathrooms, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a little different. It's a little different somehow from building their cars. I
agree completely with that. And I tried to write that at one point, but yes, I agree with that.
So I think that is a legitimate
although
concern.
Some of the problem with the robots is they don't take the high end jobs first; they take the low end jobs first. So if we don't care about income,
no, I mean the AI. I mean, if you imagine physical robots, yeah, but like going around and doing mopping and stuff, sure, but no, AI broadly speaking is already eroding things at the at the more educated level. I mean, it long ago happened that, for example, there was less of a need for paralegals and for entry-level lawyers in law firms because of just what searching the web had done for the efficiency of research.
Well, right, and architects used to spend all their time doing drafts of, drawings of plans that the top people at their firms came up with, and all those jobs have been automated. They don't exist anymore. Nobody needs to spend hours.
Oh, totally. And like translators, translation is getting good enough. Okay, so it's working at both ends, and so maybe I am coming around to a more dystopian scenario.
But it's they haven't automated Donald Trump yet. It's not working at the top. So they've but truck drivers, fast food workers, all sorts of when trucks become automated, that's a huge chunk of the.
No, this is all true, and it does. You do kind of imagine that it's gonna come down to like people writing the software, which for a while I think you'll still need, and the kind of CEOs, the managers, really upper level managers, financiers on the one hand, and then at the other hand, people tending to the needs of these people in ways that machines cannot yet tend to their needs. Yeah, I'm getting slightly scared as I talk about this. Maybe we should change the subject. It's concerning.
I mean, historically, Americans haven't really wanted a lot of servants. So if you actually look at the percent of people who had maids, it's fallen. It fell steadily until around the time the early 90s.
Yeah, but I think
then it started rising slowly, but
absolutely.
It's not skyrocketing.
No, but it seems to be rising to me, just anecdotally.
Am I just projecting when I say I am uncomfortable with servants? I find it a hassle. I would much rather have a robot clean my house than a person.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that. Yeah, with the sense of a servant. I find those interactions potentially uncomfortable. I mean, not always. It's like having a waiter at a restaurant's no big deal, but and the truth is, I mean,
I find even that problematic.
I mean, I think you and I are both maybe a little misanthropic / introverted or something. So that's part of it. Because one thing I find is that although I find it uncomfortable, like I'm going to walk out of the house and should I ignore the guy painting my house or make conversation with him? In general, I find when I make conversation, I find those things rewarding and gratifying in ways that surprise me.
And given, it seems to me if you're an evolutionary psychologist, I mean, we've had masters and servants for our entire, presumably, evolutionary history. So it shouldn't be uncomfortable for our brains to find some satisfaction in those relationships. Right?
But I certainly, when I stay in 5-star hotels, which only happens when somebody else is paying for it, I am made very uncomfortable if there's a ton of people walking around saying, "Can I do this for you? Can I do this for you?"
But, well, once we import the entire population of India here, Bob, you will have to be more comfortable with servants because people in India are more comfortable with servants and they're more comfortable being servants.
No need to import them; they can telecommute from India.
God, what would Robert Putnam say about that? Anyway, there's some things they can't do from India.
A slightly related point I would make, I guess at some point we should wrap this up probably, but a slightly related point is people keep saying, so when is AI coming? You hear some of this. It seems to me that it's basically here and evolving. I mean, AI, like in the movie, was the movie called AI? The movie recently within the last year about, what was it about the guy who was obviously supposed to be like the head of Google and a worker at Google who goes to this guy's mysterious kind of
the one with Oscar Isaac. Yeah, that was not such a bad movie. It was something like
no, but the idea was he's making an AI, and then you see this robot. I mean, the AI is here, and it's brought to us by Google and by Apple in the form of Siri, and even Microsoft in the form of Cortana. These things you can ask your machine or Amazon's Echo are getting more and more sophisticated. That's where artificial intelligence is starting to envelop us.
Right.
And
so you basically agree with my dystopia.
I'm getting there, but that's probably a bad sign. It probably means that even 90 minutes is too long to spend with you.
Bob.
Mickey.
It's going to take years of analysis to overcome that insult.
Well, you always have the option of talking through it with me because I always stand ready to have a conversation with you.
Anyway, that's fine. I'm always for short.
Like this? What else is there that we didn't talk about?
Well, I had this other idea which I shouldn't mention, but I might as well. What the hell?
As long as we're breaking the record, which I think we've already broken, we might as well just crush it. Smash it.
The placebo effect. Have there been books written about the placebo effect?
Whole
I remember
books?
I once ran into your daughter when she was 3 years old and she knew what the word placebo meant. And I said, this is a smart girl. But it seems to me the placebo effect is real and it's large. Okay.
Yeah.
And why doesn't it have, an evolutionary advantage to having the placebo effect? Because if you take this pill or think this thought or have this religious imprimatur you think makes you better, you have an evolutionary advantage over the people that don't think they have the mandate of heaven. And then B, a whole bunch of human history can be explained as the search for the placebo effect, i.e. all religion becomes a way to convince yourself that you have the mandate of heaven and that you get this little whatever 20% advantage you get from having the placebo effect. Why can't you reinterpret all of history as the search for the placebo effect?
I think you've got a book there. You should tell John Horgan, long-standing Blogging Heads contributor. I mean, he's mainly interested in the literal placebo effect, it's true, but he's very big on that.
I thought you were going to say this book has already been written.
Not that I know of. And maybe that's my final bit of guidance for you. You should write that book, Mickey. Although there is the problem that it doesn't make sense to write books anymore.
Unless you're on TV.
Yeah, I think.
I think that's my advice for you.
Is to get a bigger platform?
Get on TV, yeah. Conventional TV.
Thank you for that.
Okay, well, you have the looks for it, Bob.
Thank you for that, Mickey.
Okay, I got to suck up to you, man.
You're doing a pretty egregiously conspicuous and not credible job of it. But I thank you. It's like Mike Kinsley said in his famous piece about writing people little flattering notes. Said it's like even though they know it's just flattery, they still like it. They know that you're lying when you say I loved your column, but they like the fact that they consider you important enough to suck up to. So
it's worse than that. The more insincere it is, the more flattering it is,
right?
Because it means you force somebody to say something they don't agree with in order to suck up to you.
And that's why I was so gratified by what you just said. Because
unfortunately, Bob, this was sincere, so it's not that gratifying.
Yeah.
I don't really have to suck up to you. It's just what I really think. What can I say? Sorry.
The options are limited. I want to say something before we sign off, Mickey.
Okay.
Is there something I haven't? The one thing I want to say, I want to reiterate that we thank our commenters. They are vital. They are vital for reasons I think I've already mentioned. And they are, as I said, smart, observant, insightful, and largely civil, all of which we encourage. I also want to thank a guy without whom we would not be having this conversation. Do you remember when... so there's been 2 periods in the history of Blogging Heads. 3, actually. There was just us putting it out on a shoestring, you and me. And then we started recruiting other people to show up, but we still had no way of paying for it. Then there was a round when it looked like it might be a viable, actual profit-making thing, and we gathered up some investment. And if we hadn't gathered that up, we would have been kaput. We would not be having this conversation. And then it moved on to a non-profit footing, where it's funded by actual philanthropy. And so far, at least, that's kept us alive. But anyway, in the crucial investment phase, our angel investor was a guy named Bob Rosencrantz. And he is such a wonderful person that I wanted to say that. He's the guy who got C-SPAN off the ground. And when Brian Lamb was going around hat in hand trying to convince people this was a good idea, Bob, who was in the cable business, gave him his first increment of money, and that's what got it all started. And I have heard it said that when Brian Lamb talks about Bob Rosencrantz, his eyes get watery, and I can believe it because Bob is just such a great guy. And, he was like, on the one hand, it was an investment, but he was doing it because he's public-spirited, and he thought it was good for people to have dialogue, and people of divergent views to have dialogue in a civil way. And he and his wife Margie have been supportive all along, and I'm sure even if, he had known that he was going to lose every cent, which is what happened, I think, he would have done it because he believed in it. So I just want to thank him. He's a great guy. Everyone you meet, when you meet somebody in the cable business, like this guy, what's this guy's name? Tom Freston, who was head of Viacom or something. Is that his name? I ran into him a few years ago, and it turned out we both knew Bob. The first thing he said is what a great guy Bob Rosencrantz is. It's true. If all leaders of all nations were Bob Rosencrantz, there would be no wars. That's not an exaggeration. I mean it. He's just one of these people who's capable of seeing the other side, it gets back to what I was saying about the problem with our current foreign policy being like not just putting ourselves in the shoes of the other people. So I just want to, on this 10th anniversary of Blogging Heads, thank him in particular. He gathered a group of investors, and they are, if you want to read all the names of all these people who deserve our gratitude, they remain on the website on the masthead as the original supporters. They're all wonderful people, but Bob in particular was vital and is a tremendous human being. I wanted to say that.
I'm glad you did. I know it was a huge relief when you found him, and you were really ripping your hair out before then. So I saw that firsthand. It is true.
It is true. It was our salvation and remains that. So, 10 years. I mean, this is success, right?
I don't know.
Come on, say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I mean, it is. It's, it's a tough environment out there. There's things that last less than 10 years.
Well, I like the way you've branched out into more spiritual things, too, and the meaning of life. Nobody else is doing that, so.
Meaninglife.tv, yeah.
Yes. I wish you another 10.
And also, wasn't this fun? Don't you want to come back and have another conversation with me on Blogging Heads TV sooner rather than later, Mickey?
Well, yeah, because we did very little prep for this, and
I've been telling you that. It takes zero prep.
But in the past, when we've done no prep, we've been ripped apart in the comment section.
Well, we will be ripped apart again, Mickey. But the great thing about getting older is you care less and less about what people think about you. And we're both extremely old now.
Well, plus there's the podcast precedent, which is just to a bunch of people sitting around shooting the breeze actually is not completely uncongenial versus people who've elaborately prepped and have statistics to offer. But we'll see. We'll see what the commenters say. The night is young.
And by the way, people are wondering why I've been asymmetrical with my left shoulder further back for pretty much at least half of the conversation. There's always been one dog or another. For a while it was Frazier. Now it's Milo that I'm petting.
Is that a service dog, Bob?
Service in the sense of?
Well, there's a service dog scam, whereas if you say you need your dog to calm anxiety, you get seated at restaurants and you could take him on a plane and stuff.
These both have the effect of calming anxieties. And in some cases, it's a reciprocal relationship, especially with Frazier.
Say yes, that's obviously not the scam. But this is like the moment in Peter Pan where you have to clap for Tinkerbell. If the commenters like us, why not come back? If they rip us to shreds with pedantic criticism, maybe not.
So would that be you issuing an ultimatum to the commenters, Mickey?
I'm just making the stakes clear.
If you're mean to me, no more Mickey. Is that what you're saying?
If you want Tinkerbell to die, which maybe you do,
you can save this child or this old man, as the case may be, or turn the page.
Correct.
There's a reference that the younger half of our audience will not get.
People get that.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. Hey, Mickey, thank you. Congratulations to us. And may we live long and prosper.
Okay, cool.
See you next time.
Here. See you soon.
Wait, we have 1 minute of bonus Blogging Heads material for you. After I finished my conversation with Mickey, I remembered that there were 2 categories of people that I had meant to thank on this 10th anniversary of Blogging Heads. First, there are all the people who have appeared on the site, who have been part of the conversation. Needless to say, without them, the site would be a giant void in the space-time continuum. There are hundreds of them, so I hope you'll forgive me for not mentioning them by name. The second group of people are people who have worked for Blogging Heads, either part-time or full-time over the years. I want to thank 3 people in particular because they are with us today and have been with us ever since early 2007 when the aforementioned influx of investor money allowed us to actually hire full-time workers. They are Brian Degenhart, Brenda Talbot, Aria Cohen-Wade. I should also mention a 4th person who is not working for us now, but was with us at the beginning and made very important contributions early on. That is Sang No, whose last name, NGO, eerily foreshadowed our transformation from a not entirely successful for-profit venture to a more or less successful nonprofit venture. All of these people have shown a devotion to the site that goes beyond their job descriptions, and their presence as part of my work environment has encouraged me to stick with the project through the years, through thick and thin. So thanks again to them. Thanks again to all the people who've appeared on Blogging Heads. And thanks, of course, to all the viewers, listeners, commenters, and so on. And for that matter, all sentient beings.